The bells of St. George's Chapel fell silent, leaving a void that filled instantly with the whispers of London's elite. Lady Seraphina Hamilton stood alone at the altar, a vision in ivory silk, her veil unable to hide the tremor in her hands. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. The groom, Lord Julian Devereux, was not just late, he was gone. As the chapel door slammed shut, confirming his abandonment, a single sob escaped Seraphina's lips. Her ruin was complete. But then, a new sound echoed from the pews, the heavy, determined footsteps of a man walking toward her. Sunlight, stained by the towering windows of St. George's Chapel, painted the marble floor in hues of sapphire and ruby. It should have been the most beautiful day of Lady Seraphina Hamilton's life. Instead, it was a portrait of her undoing. She had stood at that altar for 22 minutes. She knew the precise time because the great clock above the nave tolled the quarter hour, the chime sounding less like a celebration and more like a death knell. Beside her, her father, Lord Hamilton, was visibly trembling. His face, usually ruddy and cheerful, had turned a sickly, ashen grey. This wedding was not merely a union, it was a lifeline. The Hamilton name, though old, was now threadbare, mortgaged to the hilt. The Devereux fortune, represented by the groom, Lord Julian, was meant to be their salvation. Seraphina's gaze drifted over the attendees. The chapel was packed. Every major house, every powerful peer, every gossiping dowager was present. They had come to see the joining of two prominent families. Now they were witnessing a slaughter. The whispers had begun as a low hiss, like damp wood on a fire, and had grown into a brazen murmur. Ladies hid their smirks behind gloved hands. Gentlemen adjusted their cravats, sharing knowing, pitying glances. Seraphina felt their eyes on her like physical blows. She was no longer a bride. She was a spectacle. Where was Julian? She remembered their last meeting. Just yesterday, at the rehearsal dinner. He had seemed nervous, yes, but not terrified. He had kissed her hand, his lips cool, his eyes darting toward his father, the formidable Baron Devereux. Julian was a handsome man, but there was a weakness in his jaw, a constant flicker of uncertainty in his gaze that Seraphina had chosen to interpret as sensitivity. She now feared she had interpreted it as cowardice. A disturbance at the back of the chapel sent a jolt of false hope through her. But it was not Julian. It was his father, Baron Devereux, his face a mask of thunder. He marched up the side aisle, his boots striking the stone floor with angry precision. He didn't even look at Seraphina. He went straight to the anteroom where the bishop and Seraphina's father were now standing in a tense, quiet cluster. The door to the anteroom clicked shut, but the Baron's voice was not made for privacy. Muffled shouts leaked into the sacred silence. Impossible! Note left. Utter disgrace. Ruin. Seraphina felt the blood drain from her face. A note. He had left a note. He hadn't just been delayed by a carriage accident. He hadn't taken ill. He had fled. The anteroom door burst open. Baron Devereux stalked out, his face purple with rage. He saw Seraphina, his eyes lingering on her for a single, cruel second. There was no apology in his gaze. There was only contempt, as if she were the one who had orchestrated this humiliation. He then turned to the assembled guests. "The wedding," he boomed, his voice cracking with false regret, "is postponed." A collective, horrified gasp filled the chapel. Postponed? Such a gentle word for such a brutal act. Seraphina's father staggered, clutching his chest. "No," he whispered, his plea lost in the rising cacophony. Seraphina's own legs gave way. Her bouquet of white roses slipped from her nerveless fingers, scattering petals across the altar steps. This was the end. Her family was ruined. Her reputation was annihilated. She would be the abandoned bride, a story told in whispers for seasons to come. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the full impact of her social death. The only sound was the shuffling of feet as guests, eager to escape the profound discomfort, began to rise. Then another sound cut through the chaos. It was not a whisper. It was not the shuffling of guests. It was a clear, steady, resonant footstep. Deliberate, unhurried. Serafina opened her eyes. From the front pew, a man had risen, a man who had sat silent and watchful through the entire ordeal. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black frock coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was meticulously styled, and his face was all hard angles and shadows. He was Alistair Vane, the Duke of Hawthorne. The Iron Duke, they called him. A man of immense wealth and staggering power, known for his cold demeanor and ruthless business dealings. He was a recluse, rarely seen at social events. His presence today had been a mystery. He had no close ties to either the Hamiltons or the Devereuxs. He was not moving toward the exit. He was walking up the aisle, directly toward her. The whispers died instantly, replaced by a stunned, absolute silence. He passed the scattered rose petals, his polished black boots stopping just inches from the hem of her wedding gown. Serafina had to tilt her head back to look at him. His eyes were the color of a winter storm, and they held an intensity that stole her breath. He did not look at her with pity. He looked at her with calculation. He turned his gaze from her to the bewildered bishop. Bishop. The Duke's voice was a low baritone that filled the silent chapel, devoid of emotion, but carrying absolute authority. There has been a misunderstanding. The wedding is not postponed. Serafina's heart stopped. The Duke of Hawthorne turned his gaze back to her. His stormy eyes locked onto hers, and he made a simple, earth-shattering statement. It is merely changing grooms. The silence that followed the Duke's pronouncement was so profound that Serafina could hear the frantic pounding of her own blood. Every eye in St. George's Chapel, curious, shocked, and scandalized, was fixed on the man standing before her. Alistair Vane, the Duke of Hawthorne, looked utterly unperturbed by the sensation he had caused. He might as well have been commenting on the weather. Serafina's father, Lord Hamilton, found his voice first. It was a strangled, hopeful rasp. "Your Grace, what is the meaning of this?" The Duke did not turn. His gaze remained locked on Serafina. "The meaning is plain, Lord Hamilton. Your daughter requires a groom. I require a wife. It seems a most efficient solution to both our predicaments." Efficient. The word was cold, clinical, a business transaction. Serafina stared at him, her mind a whirlwind. This was madness. She didn't know this man. She knew of him, of course. Everyone did. He was impossibly wealthy, notoriously private, and it was whispered, possessed of a heart as cold and hard as the marble floors of his ducal seat, Hawthorne Hall. He was not a man one married, he was a man one avoided. "But your Grace," the bishop stammered, his robes rustling as he shifted nervously. "This is highly irregular. A marriage license is specific. The banns were read for Lady Serafina and Lord Julian." "I am sure," Alistair said, his voice dropping half an octave, "that for a man of your resourcefulness, Bishop, a name on a piece of paper is a trivial obstacle. Especially," he added, "when the alternative is such a grievous insult to the church and to a noble house." He was not asking. He was commanding. He then did something that sent a fresh shock through the crowd. He extended a gloved hand, not to her father, but to Serafina. "Lady Serafina," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name. The choice, of course, is yours. You can leave this chapel today as the woman Lord Devereux abandoned, or you can leave it as the Duchess of Hawthorne. It was the cruelest, kindest choice she had ever been offered. He was offering her a shield, but it felt like a cage. He was saving her family from immediate ruin, but binding her to a stranger. A cold, powerful, and possibly dangerous stranger. She looked past him to where Baron Devereux stood frozen, his face a comical picture of apoplectic rage. He had wanted to see her ruined, but not like this. This was not ruin. This was an elevation. She looked at her father, who was now watching her with a desperate, pleading hope. He was a weak man, her father, but she loved him. His life was in her hands. And then she thought of Julian, the coward who had left her to face this humiliation alone. The man she had thought she could, perhaps, grow to love. That spark of warmth was now dead, replaced by a cold, hard ember of resentment. She would not be the abandoned bride. She would not be the subject of pity and scorn. Slowly, deliberately, Serafina placed her trembling hand into the Duke's offered one. His grip was firm, his glove a stark black against her ivory silk. The contact was electric, sending a shiver not of fear, but of strange, terrifying resolve up her arm. "I accept your proposal, Your Grace," she said, her voice clearer and stronger than she thought possible. Alistair Vane nodded once, a curt, satisfied gesture. He turned to the bishop. "Proceed." The bishop, pale but pragmatic, gestured for them to kneel. The rest of the ceremony was a blur to Serafina. She felt as though she were floating somewhere above her own body, watching a play. The Duke's responses were crisp and immediate. "I will." When it came time for her own vows, she faltered. This was not the man she had expected. These were not the vows she had practiced. She felt the Duke's thumb press almost imperceptibly against her hand. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a reminder. Steady. She spoke the words, her voice a whisper. "I, Serafina, take thee, Alistair." When the bishop finally pronounced them man and wife, there was no joyous cheer. There was only the stunned silence of the attendees, punctuated by a low, furious sound from Baron Devereux as he stormed out of the chapel, slamming the oak door behind him. Alistair rose to his feet, pulling Serafina up with him. He was her husband. He turned to her. The chapel was waiting for the kiss. Serafina's breath hitched. This man was a fortress, and she had no idea how to breach its walls. He looked down at her, his stormy eyes unreadable. He did not lean in for a romantic embrace. Instead, he lifted her hand, the one that now bore his heavy, gold signet ring, as they'd had no wedding band for her, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. The touch was brief, dry, and utterly devoid of passion. It was a seal, a contract. "Duchess," he murmured, for her ears only. Then he turned, tucking her hand firmly into the crook of his arm, and began the long walk back down the aisle. Serafina walked beside him, her head held high. She did not look at the faces in the crowd. She did not look at her weeping mother or her relieved father. She looked straight ahead, at the light streaming through the open doors, her arm linked with the most powerful and the most terrifying man in England. She had been saved from ruin, only to be claimed by an enigma. The ride from St. George's Chapel to Hawthorne Hall, the Duke's London residence, was undertaken in the most opulent carriage Serafina had ever seen. It was lacquered in a deep, gleaming black, emblazoned with the Vane family crest, a falcon clutching a thunderbolt. Yet, the plush velvet cushions and smooth ride offered no comfort. The silence inside the carriage was heavier and more oppressive than the silence in the chapel had been. Her new husband, the Duke of Hawthorne, sat opposite her. He did not lounge. He sat perfectly upright, his gloved hands resting on a silver-topped cane, his gaze fixed on the passing London streets. He had not spoken a single word to her since handing her into the carriage. Seraphina, now Duchess of Hawthorne, felt the adrenaline of the ceremony fading, replaced by a chilling, profound dread. She was married. She was married to a man who had not smiled at her, had not offered a word of comfort, and had purchased her, as it were, in the most public forum imaginable. She pressed her hands together in her lap, the unfamiliar weight of his signet ring on her finger, a constant, heavy reminder of the bargain she had struck. "Your Grace," she began, her voice small. He did not turn his head, but his eyes flicked to meet hers. "Duchess." The title was so new, so strange. "I do not know what to say. I must thank you. You saved my family from— I require no gratitude," he cut her off, his tone flat. "What happened in that chapel was not a rescue. It was a transaction. You will do well to remember that." Seraphina flinched as if he had struck her. "A transaction. A transaction," she repeated, a flash of her family's pride returning. "And what precisely did you purchase?" For the first time, a flicker of something, interest perhaps, stirred in his cold gaze. He turned his head fully to look at her. "I purchased a duchess, a respectable, high-born and—" He paused, his eyes raking over her. "Suitable chatelaine for my houses. I purchased a mother for my heir." The bluntness was staggering. He spoke of an heir as one might speak of a necessary piece of furniture. "And I," Alistair continued, his voice dangerously soft, "paid for your family's dignity. As of this morning, Lord Hamilton's debts are mine, and as of this afternoon, they are settled, in full. Your father will be a solvent man by nightfall. That is the service I have rendered. Your service, in return, is to be my duchess." Seraphina swallowed, the knot in her throat tightening. "I see. And what does being your duchess entail? Beyond an heir?" "It entails discretion," he said. "It entails managing my household with quiet competence. It entails understanding that I am a man who values his privacy above all else. My life is my own, Duchess. Your life is now mine, in a manner of speaking. You will have access to my wealth, my homes, and my protection. You will want for nothing. In return, you will not burden me with emotional displays." He was, she realized, warning her. "Do not expect affection. Do not expect friendship. Do not expect love." "I understand," she whispered, lowering her gaze to her hands. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. He had just forbidden emotional displays, and she would not fail her first test as Duchess. "Good," he said, and turned his attention back to the window. The rest of the journey passed in that chilling silence. When the carriage finally rumbled to a stop, it was not before a grand, welcoming staircase. Instead, it was at a smaller, private entrance, at the side of a monolith of grey stone that was Hawthorne Hall. The door was opened not by a line of welcoming servants, but by a single, severe-looking butler. "Your Grace," the butler, whose name she would learn was Rigby, said with a stiff bow. Alistair stepped out and then turned, offering Seraphina his hand to help her down. His touch was as impersonal as it had been at the altar. He led her into a dark, wood-panelled foyer. The house was immaculate but cold. There were no flowers, no welcoming fires. It felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. "Rigby," the Duke said, already shrugging out of his coat. "Have Mrs. Davies prepare the Duchess's rooms, the Rosewood suite." The butler's eyebrows shot up, a barely perceptible motion. "The Rosewood suite, Your Grace, not the Duchess's main apartments?" "The Rosewood suite," Alistair repeated, his voice firm. "It is separate. It will afford her grace the privacy she requires." Serafina knew exactly what that meant. The Rosewood Suite was in the East Wing. The Duke's own apartments, she knew from societal gossip, were in the West Wing. He was installing her as far away from himself as the house would allow. "As you wish, Your Grace." A woman in a severe black dress descended the stairs. She was older, with sharp eyes and a pursed mouth. "This," the Duke said, "is my aunt, Lady Philippa Vane. She has managed my household." Lady Philippa looked Serafina up and down, her gaze lingering on the wedding dress. "So," the old woman said, her voice like dry, rustling leaves, "it's true. You're the one he picked up off the floor of St. George's." "Aunt," the Duke warned. "Oh, hush, Alistair. I'm not blind," Lady Philippa sniffed. "So you are the new Duchess, the abandoned bride. You've caused quite the scandal, girl, and you've dragged this house into it." "Lady Philippa," Serafina said, lifting her chin, "I was the victim of a scandal, not its author. And I am, as you say, the new Duchess. I would ask you to remember that." The old woman's eyes widened in surprise, and a small, dangerous smile touched her lips. Feisty. Perhaps Alistair hasn't made a complete fool of himself after all. "Very well, Duchess. We shall see how long that fire lasts. Mrs. Davies is waiting for you. Welcome to Hawthorne Hall. I dare say you'll find it different from what you're used to." With that, she turned and swept away. Alistair watched her go, then looked at Serafina. "Rigby will show you to your rooms. We will dine tonight at 8. Do not be late." He did not wait for a reply. He simply turned on his heel and strode down the long, dark corridor, his footsteps echoing on the marble, leaving Serafina alone in the foyer of her new, cold home. The Rosewood Suite was beautiful. It was also a gilded cage, located at the opposite end of the vast mansion from the Duke's private wing. The sitting room was decorated in pale rose silks. The furniture was exquisite, and the bedroom was dominated by a vast, lonely-looking four-poster bed. A young, nervous maid named Alice was assigned to her. She helped Serafina out of the elaborate wedding gown, the gown of a wedding that had never truly been, and into a simple day dress. "Will His Grace be joining you, Your Grace?" Alice asked, her eyes downcast. "No, Alice," Serafina said, the words tasting like ash. "His Grace is occupied." The first week of her marriage was the loneliest period of Serafina's life. She saw her husband precisely twice. The first was at the dinner she had been summoned to, just hours after her arrival. It was a silent, tense affair in a cavernous dining room. She, Alistair, and Lady Philippa ate 3 courses without a single word of genuine conversation being exchanged. The second time was 3 days later, when he'd summoned her to his study, a room overflowing with books and maps, smelling of leather and old tobacco. He had not asked her to sit. He simply pushed a heavy ledger across his desk. "This is the household accounts," he'd said. "Lady Philippa is of an older generation. She finds the task taxing. It is now yours. You will report to me every Friday." And that was it. She was his accountant, his chatelaine, not his wife. Serafina, however, was not one to languish. She had her father's resilience, if not his weakness. If she was to be a prisoner, she would at least be the warden of her own jail. She threw herself into her duties. She learned the household staff, the delivery schedules, the complex politics of the kitchen. She found the ledgers in disarray, and she balanced them. She learned the house. Hawthorne Hall was immense, a maze of corridors and forgotten rooms, and it was a house of secrets. The staff was terrified of the Duke. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the shadows, as if he might materialize at any moment, They never spoke of him directly, only His Grace. But they spoke of her. Poor Lady Rosamond, Seraphina heard two housemaids whisper as they polished silver. Never left the north wing. She does. Hush, the other hissed. His Grace will have your hide. No one is to speak of it. Rosamond. Seraphina had heard the name. Alistair's younger sister. She was believed to be in ill health, living a quiet life in the country. But the maids said North Wing. Seraphina also noticed the animosity Lady Philippa held for her was nothing compared to the venom she reserved for one family, the Devereuxs. One afternoon, Seraphina was in the morning room, reviewing menus, when Lady Philippa entered. "The post has arrived," the older woman announced, tapping a letter. "It seems your former intended has fled the country. Lord Julian and his father have decamped to the continent, utterly ruined. Their estates are being seized by creditors as we speak." Seraphina felt a strange emptiness. Not sorrow, but a final, hollow punctuation mark. "I see. Good riddance," Lady Philippa spat, her usual composure cracking. "The Devereux family is poison. They get what they deserve. They destroy everything they touch." The sheer hatred in her voice was startling. "You speak as if from experience, Lady Philippa," Seraphina ventured carefully. Lady Philippa's eyes snapped to hers. "Do not," she warned. "Pry into matters that do not concern you, girl. You may wear the title, but you are not a Vane. You do not know our history. You do not know our pain." This only fueled Seraphina's resolve. That night, she waited until the house was deep in slumber. The north wing, she had learned, was kept locked. But as the Duchess, she now possessed a large ring of household keys. She moved through the silent, moonlit corridors, her heart hammering. The north wing was cold, the air thick with dust. Most rooms were shrouded in white cloths, but at the very end of the hall, a thin line of light glowed from beneath a door. She heard a soft sound, weeping. Seraphina's hand trembled as she knocked. The weeping stopped abruptly. "Go away, Alice," a weak voice called. "I don't want any more broth." "It is not Alice," Seraphina said, her voice soft. "It is Seraphina, the Duchess of Hawthorne." A long silence. Then the sound of a key turning in the lock. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a pale face, framed by lank, dark hair. The woman looked to be in her mid-20s, but her eyes were ancient, haunted. "You are his new wife," the woman whispered. She was beautiful, or had been, before sorrow had carved such deep lines into her face. "And you," Seraphina said, her heart aching, "must be Lady Rosamond Vane." Rosamond Vane stared at her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "You shouldn't be here. He'll be furious. Alistair doesn't allow visitors." "I am not a visitor. I am his wife." "May I come in?" Rosamond hesitated, then opened the door. The room was comfortable but sparse, a fire guttered in the hearth. A painting, a portrait of a handsome, smiling young man, had been turned to face the wall. "Why are you here?" Rosamond asked, clutching her wrapper to her chest. "I live here," Seraphina said gently. "I heard you cry." Rosamond's face crumpled. "I cry often. It does no good." "Why are you hidden away, Rosamond? They say you are in the country." Rosamond laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "I am in the country of my brother's making. He hides me. He protects me. He smothers me." "Protects you from what?" Rosamond walked to the window, staring out at the dark, empty garden. "From the world. From the memory." She pointed a trembling finger at the painting that faced the wall. "From him." Seraphina felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "Who is he?" "My fiancé. Or he was, 5 years ago. Rosamond's voice was barely a whisper. He was charming. He was handsome. He said he loved me. We were to be married. She turned, her eyes burning with a feverish light. He was the toast of the season. Everyone adored him. What happened? Serafina asked. He ruined me, Rosamond said, the words stark and terrible. He took what was not his to take. And then, a week before the wedding, he was gone. Vanished. Left me with nothing but shame and a note saying he had found a richer prize. My God, Serafina breathed, thinking of Julian. Alistair found me. I was not in my right mind. I was trying to end it. He saved me. But he changed. The brother I knew, the one who laughed, he died that day. The Iron Duke was born. He locked me away here to protect my reputation. But really, I think, to protect his own heart. He cannot bear to look at what became of me. Serafina looked at the painting. She had to know. She walked over and, taking a deep breath, turned it around. She gasped. It was not Julian, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The same weak chin, the same curling hair, the same arrogant eyes. Who is this man? Serafina demanded. Rosamond Vane spoke the name that would unravel everything. His name, she whispered, was Arthur Devereux, Lord Julian's older brother. Serafina stood frozen in the moonlit room, the portrait of Arthur Devereux in her hands. The connection was a physical shock, a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. Arthur Devereux, Julian Devereux. The Devereux family is poison. They destroy everything they touch. Lady Philippa's words echoed in her mind. He died, Rosamond continued, her voice detached, as if reciting a story she had told herself 1,000 times. A year later, a riding accident in France. Alistair said it was God's justice, but it wasn't. Justice would have been him facing what he did. Justice would have been me being whole again. Alistair, Serafina said, her mind racing. Your brother. He knew all this. He knew who Julian was. Of course, Rosamond said. He never forgets. He never forgives. He is a man made of iron and memory. Suddenly, the events at St. George's Chapel realigned themselves in Serafina's mind. The Duke's unexpected presence, the cold, calculated way he had watched the Devereux family, the rage on Baron Devereux's face. It wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a rescue. It was revenge. He knew, Serafina whispered, a cold fury rising in her. He knew Julian would abandon me. What? Rosamond looked confused. No, he wouldn't. He did, Serafina said, her voice hardening. She set the portrait down. He didn't just know, Rosamond. I think he orchestrated it. She turned and left the north wing, her mind a torrent of betrayal. She had been a pawn, a piece in Alistair's long-simmering game against the Devereux family. He hadn't saved her from humiliation. He had used her humiliation as the final, triumphant move in his war. She marched through the silent house, her velvet robe whispering angrily behind her. She didn't stop at the West Wing. She went straight to his study, the only room where a light still burned. She didn't knock. She threw the doors open. Alistair was at his desk, a glass of brandy in one hand, a ledger in the other. He looked up, his face unreadable, but his eyes narrowed at her intrusion. You are not welcome here, he said, his voice quiet and deadly. I just came from the north wing, Serafina announced, her voice shaking with rage. I spoke with your sister. The glass in Alistair's hand stopped halfway to his lips. He set it down with meticulous care. You have no right. No right? I am your wife. The wife you acquired as a trophy in your war against the Devereux. He rose slowly from his chair, a truly intimidating figure in the dim light. You do not know what you are talking about. Leave. No, Serafina cried, stepping toward the desk. I know everything. I know what Arthur Devereux did to Rosamond. I know why you hate them. And I know what you did at that chapel. And what is it you believe I did? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. You ruined them. Lady Philippa told me. The Devereux are finished, their estates seized. That was you, wasn't it? You, with your infinite wealth, you bought up their debts. You held their lives in your hand. He said nothing. His silence was her confirmation. And Julian, she pressed on, tears of fury welling in her eyes. He didn't just decide to leave me at the altar, did he? You forced him. You gave him a choice. Publicly humiliate me, or you would see him and his father in debtor's prison. You used me, Alistair. You used my shame to complete your revenge. He stared at her, his face a mask of stone. Yes, he said. The admission hit her harder than a denial would have. Yes, he repeated. I have spent 5 years systematically destroying the Devereux family. I bought every one of their markers, every loan, every foolish investment. Baron Devereux, in his arrogance, never saw the puppet master. He believed his luck was simply turning. And Julian's marriage to me. That was their last, desperate gamble, Alistair said, his voice laced with contempt. Your father's name, your mother's connections, and your modest dowry. It was to be their saving grace. I decided to take that from them, too. So you gave Julian the choice, Serafina whispered, horrified. I gave him the choice, Alistair confirmed. He could marry you, and I would have him and his father arrested for fraud on the steps of St. George's, or he could walk away, leaving his bride at the altar, and I would permit them to flee the country with their lives. He, being a Devereux, chose the coward's path. He chose to save himself and sacrifice you. Serafina sank into a chair, her legs giving out. And you sat in that pew, and you watched. I watched, he agreed. I watched my revenge come to fruition. I watched the man who stood by and did nothing while his brother destroyed my sister, get his own public comeuppance. And me? She looked up, her face wet with tears. What about me, Alistair? Was I just collateral damage? A casualty of your war? He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something human in his gaze. A crack in the iron. That, he said, his voice rough, is where the plan diverged. What do you mean? I planned to ruin them. I planned to see Julian walk away. I planned to witness your family's fury and the Devereux's ultimate disgrace. He walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. I did not plan for you. Me. I watched you stand there, he said, his back to her. I watched you absorb the single greatest humiliation a woman of our class can endure. And you didn't scream. You didn't faint. You stood. You were shaking, but you stood. And when that fool Devereux and his cur of a son left, I saw you, and I realized my revenge was incomplete. He turned to face her. To let you be destroyed by them would be to give them a victory. They would have claimed 2 victims. My sister and you. I could not permit it. So you married me, she said, her heart pounding. To save me? I married you, he corrected, because it was the ultimate move. It was the final, perfect revenge. I took their money. I took their estates. I took their name. And then, in front of the entire world, I took their prize. I took the bride they had discarded and made her the most powerful duchess in England. I didn't just ruin them. I erased them. And I elevated you. A transaction, she breathed, remembering his words in the carriage. A transaction, he confirmed, born of revenge, but a transaction that is, nonetheless, complete. You are my Duchess, Serafina, and no one, especially a Devereux, will ever harm you again. He was a monster. He was a protector. He was her husband, and for the first time, Serafina didn't know whether to run from him or to run to him. The revelation settled over Hawthorne Hall, changing the very atmosphere Serafina breathed. She was not a wife. She was a statement. She was the living, breathing proof of Alistair Vane's total victory. And yet, something had shifted between them. He had confessed. He had told her the truth, a truth he had hidden from the rest of the world, even his own family. In sharing his darkness, he had inadvertently created a bond. He no longer dined alone. He joined her and Lady Philippa every evening. The dinners were still quiet, but they were no longer cold. He would ask her about the household, about her day, and he would listen. He unsealed the north wing. Rosamond, fragile but curious, began to join them for tea. Alistair would watch his sister interact with his wife, a strange, complex expression on his face. Serafina, in turn, found herself watching him. She saw the way he ensured Rosamond always had the warmest seat by the fire. She saw the quiet integrity with which he dealt with his staff. He was a hard man, yes, but he was not unjust. He was a man of iron, as his sister had said, but iron could be forged into a shield as easily as a sword. She was beginning to feel safe. This fragile peace was shattered 3 weeks after her marriage. Serafina was arranging flowers in the morning room when Rigby, the butler, entered. His face was paler than usual. "Your Grace," he said, his voice low. "You have a visitor." He refused to be announced. He insisted. "A visitor? Who?" Rigby stepped aside. Standing in the doorway, looking dishevelled, desperate and thin, was Lord Julian Devereux. Serafina dropped the vase. It shattered on the floor, water and lilies scattering across the parquet. "You," she breathed. "Serafina," he said, taking a step into the room. He was no longer the preening groom. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. "Thank God. I had to see you. I had to explain." "Explain?" Serafina's shock was quickly turning to ice. "Explain what, Julian? How you left me at the altar. How you humiliated me in front of all of London. You don't understand," he said, advancing on her. "It was him, Hawthorne. He's a devil. He forced me." "I know," Serafina said, her voice dangerously quiet. Julian stopped. "You know? He told you? I know he ruined your family. I know he gave you a choice." "Then you know I had no choice," he cried, relief washing over his face. "He would have sent my father to prison. I did it to save my father. But I never stopped loving you, Serafina. Not for a moment. This marriage you're in, it's a sham. He doesn't love you. He's a cold-hearted monster. He only married you to spite me, to complete his collection of Devereux property." He reached for her hands. "Come with me," he pleaded. "I have a little money left, enough to get to America. We can start new, away from him, away from this. I love you, Serafina. I always have." Serafina looked at the man before her, the man she had once thought sensitive, the man she had agreed to marry to save her family. He was pleading, his eyes watery with self-pity, and she felt nothing, no spark of the old warmth, no pity, only a profound, clarifying contempt. "You love me?" she asked. "You loved me when you stood by while your brother destroyed Rosamond Vane?" Julian recoiled. "I knew nothing of that. That was Arthur. It had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with you. It had to do with the rotten core of your family. You stood by and watched your family destroy an innocent woman. And then you agreed to save your own skin by destroying another. By destroying me. You didn't do it to save your father, Julian. You did it to save yourself. No, it's not true. He's poisoned you against me. He didn't have to, Serafina said, pulling her hands from his grasp. You did. You stood in that chapel, and you had a choice. You could have stayed. You could have faced the consequences with your family. You could have been a man. But you are a Devereux. You chose to be a coward. You chose to sacrifice me to save yourself. You would have preferred I let my family be dragged to prison? He stammered, his desperation turning ugly. I would have preferred you had an ounce of honor, she shot back. But you don't. You come here, a beggar, trying to steal another man's wife, just as your brother stole another man's honor. She's not for stealing. The voice came from the doorway. Alistair Vane stood there, his frame filling the entrance. He was not in a rage. He looked perfectly, terrifyingly calm. Julian spun around, his face draining of all color. Hawthorne, this is a private conversation. My wife has no private conversations with you, Alistair said, walking slowly into the room. He stopped beside Serafina, a silent, powerful show of solidarity. You are trespassing, Devereux. You were permitted to leave the country. You were not invited back. I came for Serafina, Julian blustered, trying to regain his footing. She doesn't belong to you. You bought her. I did, Alistair agreed, his voice a silken threat. And I am a man who protects his acquisitions. You have 10 seconds to remove yourself from my house before I have Rigby summon the authorities. And believe me, the magistrates will be very interested to know you have returned to England. Julian looked from Alistair's iron expression to Serafina's cold one. He saw no weakness, no flicker of hope. He was defeated. Utterly. You're a witch, he spat at Serafina. You're as cold as he is. You two deserve each other. Yes, Serafina said, lifting her chin. I believe we do. Now get out. Julian glared, his chest heaving, but the fear of debtor's prison was greater than his pride. He turned and practically fled the room. Serafina stood in the silence, the sound of the shattered vase grinding under her shoe. She was shaking. Alistair did not move. He waited until the front door slammed shut. He then turned to her. She expected him to be angry at her for receiving Julian. She expected a lecture on discretion. Instead, he looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was not calculation. It was not revenge. It was a raw, stark admiration. You were, he said, his voice rough. Magnificent. He reached out, not for her hand, but for her face. His gloved fingers brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was hesitant, as if he were touching a flame. He was right about one thing, Alistair murmured, his stormy eyes searching hers. What is that? She whispered. I do not deserve you. And then, for the first time, Alistair Vane, the Iron Duke, leaned down and kissed his wife. It was not the chaste sealing of a contract. It was a kiss of fire and iron, a claiming and a surrender, all in one. The kiss in the morning room was a silent armistice. It did not erase the cold calculations of their beginning, but it forged something new. The marriage, born of revenge and convenience, began to thaw into a partnership. Alistair was still the Iron Duke. He was still private, demanding and powerful. But Serafina was no longer his acquisition. She was his duchess. She saw the truth of this at the Ashworth Ball, the first major social event of the new season. Their arrival caused the entire ballroom to fall silent. This was the moment Serafina had dreaded. She was, to them, still the abandoned bride, and he was the enigma who had claimed her. As they began the first waltz, the whispers were audible. "That's her! Look at him!" "Can you imagine?" Alistair held her firmly. "Do not listen," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Look at me." She did, and in his eyes she saw not the calculating stranger from the chapel, but the man who had called her magnificent as she faced down her past. She smiled, a genuine, brilliant smile. "They are looking, Your Grace," she whispered. "Let them look," he replied, pulling her a fraction closer. But the true test came later. Seraphina saw Lady Philippa corner a notorious gossip, the Marchioness of Downey, who had been loudly speculating about Rosamond Vane's mysterious illness. Seraphina left Alistair's side and approached them. "Lady Downey," Seraphina said, her voice clear and carrying. The Marchioness turned, surprised. "Your Grace, I overheard your concern for my sister-in-law, Lady Rosamond. How kind of you to inquire." Lady Downey, realizing she'd been caught, flushed. Yes, we have all been so worried." "Then allow me to alleviate your worry," Seraphina said, her smile polite but razor-sharp. "My sister is not ill. She is, in fact, here tonight." She gestured toward the alcove. Rosamond Vane stood there, pale but resolute, dressed in a beautiful silver gown. It was her first social event in 5 years. A gasp went through the nearby guests. "Rosamond suffered a great shock some years ago," Seraphina continued, her voice projecting to the silent onlookers. "She was the victim of a cruel and cowardly man. A man from a family, I am sad to say, that proved to have no honor at all. The Devereux family." She spoke the name clearly. It was a declaration of war and a final, public execution. "My husband," Seraphina said, "has spent years protecting his sister from the poison of gossip and the cruelty of men like Arthur Devereux. But she is a Vane, and Vanes do not hide forever." She walked to Rosamond and took her hand. "Rosamond is under my protection, and my husband's. She is re-entering society, and we will not hear a single word against her. Am I understood?" She scanned the faces of the crowd. She saw shock, awe, and, from the Marchioness of Downey, fear. "Perfectly, Your Grace," the Marchioness stammered. "Good." Seraphina led Rosamond into the center of the ballroom. Alistair was waiting. He looked at his wife, his eyes blazing with an emotion so powerful it made Seraphina's heart ache. He gave Seraphina a curt nod of profound respect. Then he turned to his sister. "Rosamond," he said, his voice softer than Seraphina had ever heard it. "Will you grant me this dance?" Rosamond, tears shining in her eyes, nodded. As the Duke led his sister onto the floor, Seraphina stood, triumphant, beside Lady Philippa. "Well," the old woman sniffed, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "I suppose you'll do, girl. I suppose you'll do." Later that night, in their shared apartments, Seraphina had moved from the Rosewood suite weeks ago. Alistair stood by the fire. "What you did tonight," he said, "for Rosamond. It was more than I could have asked." "She is my sister too now," Seraphina said, coming to stand beside him. He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "I began all this for revenge, Seraphina. I wanted to destroy the Devereux name. I wanted to punish them for what they did to my family. I know. But I was wrong." He turned to her, his gaze intense. "My revenge was not complete when I ruined them. It was not complete when I married you." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "It is complete now, watching you and Rosamond tonight, watching my sister smile again. That is victory." He had started this to avenge the past, but in doing so, he had, by accident, built a future. "I am not a good man, Seraphina," he murmured. "I am not looking for a good man, Alistair," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "I am looking for my man." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. The Iron Duke and his abandoned bride. They were not a gentle couple. They were not a soft romance. They were a fortress, built of the stones life had thrown at them. And together, they were impregnable. What a journey. From the depths of public humiliation to the pinnacle of power. Lady Seraphina's life was shattered at the altar, only to be rebuilt by the most unlikely man. She was abandoned by a coward, but she was claimed by the Iron Duke. Theirs was not a simple love story, but a complex tapestry of revenge, strategy, and ultimately, a fierce, unbreakable bond. She didn't just survive her ordeal. She used it to forge a new destiny, becoming the one person who could heal a broken family and command the respect of all of London. If you loved this story of drama, twists, and powerful romance, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more historical dramas just like this one.